Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of How to Make Your Own Miniatures Game. I am Rick Graham, owner of White Light Media and creator of the Revelation Skirmish and Field of Legends miniatures games. You can check out my company's website and get information on our other projects by going to whitelightmedia.org. Now, last episode, I talked about playtesting. One of those very important components was getting feedback from your players. So in this episode, our conversation is going to focus on that feedback. More specifically, my goal is to try and help you tell the difference between good feedback and bad, because sometimes as the creator, it is really hard to tell the difference. We can't cover everything, but I will try to give you a solid base to work from. And, this topic also will be relevant for feedback you receive on the internet. So it's not necessarily just your gameplay testing. First, I think we should discuss some things that you should do. First, test your game on your own. As I've said before, you need to just keep beating that horse. Really trying to make sure it has captured a piece of what you intended it to. The only way you're going to know if you're getting further along into the type of dream game or the game you're envisioning is if you are doing some of the playtesting yourself before anybody else tests it. Sometimes you might be so excited you just want to jump to having somebody else. I would extremely recommend against that, just for the fact that you need to make sure that the game doesn't totally blow first. And then from there, you can kind of make sure, let's bring in one other person, a close friend who wants to play test. And then, you kind of go from there. As a side caveat, I am recording this in my apartment. Our windows are pretty junky. They're they're way older than I am. So sometimes you'll hear vehicles and stuff. So sorry about that. The second thing I think you should try to do is to ready yourself that some people, no matter what you do, will absolutely 1010% will not like your ideas or your game. It is the hardest part, or at least one of the hardest parts of creating anything, but especially in a game or in a sci-fi universe or any type of universe, whatever type of game you're creating, because you know that some people will not like your work, or you at least should know that. And even worse, that I think, other than them just saying flat out, I don't like it, is when they compare it to the wrong thing in their mind. And they just can't get into your world, where they start comparing you to, oh, this is just like Star Wars. And you're like, no, this has nothing to do with Star Wars. This is a totally different thing. There's no aliens here, or there's no robots, or whatever the case may be. Maybe there's no space travel. Everything you're doing is fantasy. They're like, oh, Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, no, it's not Dungeons and Dragons. This is a totally different type of game. But they get that idea in their head and they're kind of stuck, and they just latch onto that. That sucks, because it's really hard to get that out of their mind once that's in, especially if they're only going to be a play tester once or a couple of times and then they lose interest. You're kind of stuck. There's not really anything you can do about that. And you just got to know that some people are going to have the wrong impression about your game no matter what you do, or they're just going to not like it. Okay. I would argue, however, that it is a bit liberating, because you know that people will not always be on board. So you don't have to feel like you need everyone to like it. All right, now moving on. Both of these things seem real easy to say, but they are not easy to do most of the time. Well, why? Because we second guess. At least I imagine a lot of us do, because if you're listening to this podcast, you are trying to be, if you're not already, a creator of something. And a game is one of the most challenging yet exciting and rewarding things, but it's also one of the most difficult things that I've done, because it's made me go through a ton of second guessing, a ton of self-doubt, a ton of, did I make the right decision? What if, I could have done X instead of Y and my game would have been totally different? And it's really, we are definitely our own worst enemy and critic. Except for the trolls. Trolls suck. But with feedback, you need to realize that most people are not going to be mean-spirited for the sake of it. Some just are oblivious. They're totally clueless to how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into something just for them to tear it apart callously. They don't know. Don't be angry with negative feedback, as hard as that is. And it is very difficult at times, but you need to instead just recognize that they are possibly a bit clueless, that maybe they mean well, but they don't know. When they say, yeah, I really don't like the way that you do your attacking and defending in your game. They don't know that you could have spent literally weeks painstakingly play testing it against yourself, against all the things that I've told you to do or recommended. And then here comes your first play tester and they're like, yeah, I don't like this. And we're going to kind of get into that a little bit more, but you need to kind of ready yourself that those comments are going to happen. You could have literally the most perfect game you've ever experienced, and there will be somebody out there who will take everything you did and crumple it up in a little ball and carelessly comment like, oh yeah, I didn't like this part of it. And it'll just like hit you right in the heart. And they don't know. And I know that they don't know because I've had these conversations with some people and I can tell they either mean well or think they mean well, or they're totally oblivious to the fact they just tore into everything that you've done without even realizing how much time it took. It is sometimes really hard to listen to feedback, but we need it at times, not all the time, but a lot of the time we do need it. And I have that caveat. We'll kind of get into that later, but we need it in order to better our game and to get it to a place of completion, or at least good enough. Because at some point you could be going back and forth, hemming and hawing over like the tiniest stat details, and you need to eventually get to a point to just release the game. So sometimes we got to be careful not to get sucked into perfection. In the same breath, even though I just took a breath, we can't be swayed by every Tom, Dick, and Harry that has an opinion, that it constantly is allowed to throttle our ideas to where we are trying to please them. I imagine I'm not the only one who wants, if I have the choice, people to like me, right? So I try not to do things as best I can when I'm not like in a management or a leadership position. If we're both equals, I don't really want to do something to make you mad at me just because I can. I don't get any reward or any satisfaction in making you mad at me. So I'll try to not do that. But when you're the creator of a product or what will become a product, we have to be very careful and temper that people-pleasing part of us if we have that, because maybe not everyone does that's listening. But for those of us who do, we have to be careful that that doesn't take over just because we only have a couple of play testers. But even still, we should not get in a place where we're trying to please that person. We're trying to design our game so that they like it, or that they're satisfied, or that it makes them feel good, or it makes them happy. We need to make sure that we're kind of being careful of how we apply that. All right. Frankly, one of the hardest lessons out of all of the game making process that I've learned is that there are lots of times that people don't even know what it is that they actually want. They will say they want your game to have this, some sort of crazy cool mechanic, or this, just amazing model of this big, character with his huge sword and he's just swinging around, just killing everything. But then when you go through the effort of introducing it, they're nowhere to be seen. That's why it's critical you don't get super sidetracked by just any old comments or feedback on your game. I can't tell you, and I don't say it to be offensive. If anybody is listening, I'm not trying to be salty. I'm trying to give those who want to be creators some honest feedback from myself a little bit further up the road than you, is that I have had so many people say, Rick, if you made, if you could do like these types of mechs for Revelations, man, it would be so cool. My mind would be blown. And then I've done a little bit of it and I don't see those comments anymore. I don't see that person. Or I'll introduce some different types of other things that I've done. And then nothing, sometimes nothing, or not from those people anyway. Oh, I have gone through the trouble of totally designing and releasing a product. And some of the people who said, Rick, you basically were saying, Rick, if you make this, I will buy it. I'm very excited about this. And then I made it and they weren't there. And I don't want to get to a place of resentment and holding that against them. I've had to learn as a creator there is a fine line, which is probably an entirely different episode, a fine line between making something that the market wants, or at least the market says it wants, and then making what I want to make as the creator. There has to be a point in between, because we don't want to make something that only we think is cool and then there's no audience for it. That's probably very unlikely or hard to do, but we don't want to necessarily market to a niche market of like 10 people either. We don't want to necessarily go for the most average common consumer, because they're probably not even interested in miniature games to begin with. But even if we could get all of them in, they wouldn't necessarily be the right audience for us. We want to try to get to the right audience that actually does have money to spend, that is willing to give our game a try, that is interested in the type of things that we're interested in. And it's a lot of things to weigh, and you make a best guess, and you move forward, and sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong, but to only chase what the audience wants. I've heard, because I went to school for business, entrepreneurial skills, just, so that I could be my own boss. And I have gone through, I have a bachelor's degree for that. I've read a whole bunch of business books. I was a manager of a business that had like 40 plus employees. And I've listened to all these different business speakers and stuff. And you hear about how, oh man, if the market says it wants it, you need to go and do it. And like, yes, on one hand, because if you keep hearing something, there's a good chance there might be a market there for it, but don't take that as a guarantee. There's a lot of other factors. Timing. If there's a freaking pandemic, Kickstarter fails. Or all kinds of other things. Like maybe that person wasn't really serious, or they were genuinely serious, but it took you so long to make it, even if it only took you a couple of weeks, and they've already moved on. They spent their money somewhere else and they're off to the next flashy thing. There is no guarantees in life, basically, other than taxes and death, as far as for most people. So, if we chase after just because of what someone says, we have to be careful that we don't go to a place where we're unhappy as the creator, because not that we have to be happy in every part of this process, because I can tell you that game making is not something that always is fun. There are parts of this that I cannot stand. Parts of it you just have to kind of just, plug your nose and do it. I can tell you that I make 3D printed models. That's how we do our physical product. We sell 3D resin printed. We have kick-ass printers. We have really high quality stuff. I've worked a lot to tweak them to get them to a pretty good place where some of our models, you can't even really tell there was supports on them. Or when they're assembled, you can barely even see that there was supports, and it's a 3D printed model. Like we are pushing ourselves to get to the place where our models one day will be just as good as almost any other company that does any sort of traditional manufacturing. I think we're pretty much already there. There's a stigma that, oh, your stuff's 3D printed. It must be, look like it came out of a hot glue gun, which isn't true anymore. But, people still have that bad idea in their head. But I mean, if you go around and you just chase what other people want, it's not always going to be a good time for you. And you're going to end up being very frustrated, like I have been, you're like, look, guys, I only have so much money to develop new products, images, models, designs, whatever you need. I only got so much money, and I'm trying to figure out what product basically would you guys want. I've straight up asked my audience several times, like, what do you want? And I've pursued some of it, and some of it I have sold some, but it wasn't an expensive product, so I wasn't going to make a lot of money from it. And then other ones, I barely got any response. And I tried to go in the direction that they wanted if it was something I could afford. Because anybody will come up and say, I really would like it if we could have 100 mechs on the table at once. And you're like, that sounds great. Do you have any money? No, I'm broke. Well, then why are you throwing up ideas that are super expensive for me to invest in and you have no money to buy anything? That isn't to say don't listen to your audience that doesn't have money. Because I have a different type of audience, because I have a mixture of novels and then the miniature game. So in the same Revelations universe. So I could have people giving me feedback that are in one or the other or both or none, as I have found sometimes too. So sometimes people just want to give feedback. And when you're asking for like honest feedback, or you're asking for any type of feedback, sometimes people just talk and they just give commentary, and it's like, that sounds great. but you're not going to participate. I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to talk to the people who want to get into Revelations, right? It's just a tough lesson to learn. As I was saying, there is a balance to be had, because sometimes the feedback is absolutely right. It is vital that we receive it. With Revelation Skirmish, I relied on my playtesters to help me find that sweet spot a lot of time with stats and points for a variety of units, because I didn't always get it right the first, second, or fifth attempt even. So at the same time, I had feedback from some who wanted me to change dramatic portions of the game. These were some of the playtesters who only played a couple of times, maybe even only once. So it felt like, the game they wanted was the type of feedback I was getting rather than the one I was building. And there's a big difference there. I had to weather those remarks and try to remain kind, whether I knew I could do those changes or not. It's tough sometimes, because sometimes people's feedback is so off base. Either they have the wrong impression of your game, they have the wrong impression of the type of game you're going for, they're bringing their experiences of the types of games they've played, and if they've only played like one miniature game before, then their feedback's going to be weird. If they've never played a miniature game, they're going to have a different type of feedback. Now, and playing against, allowing someone who's never played a game before is fantastic feedback, because they have the freshest eyes. But they also won't know some of like industry standards. So like if you do a D6 system, they're not going to know that D6 are super common, and they're in almost, every type of regular board game that uses dice. And then a lot of miniature games even use D6s. So they might be like, well, why am I using a D6? There's not that many numbers on it. It's stupid. But they don't know what they don't know. Or they don't want to use measuring tapes. And you're like, look, you either use a measuring tape or you use a grid. You can't just move them around like they're action figures, just going pew, pew, pew to each other. There has to be rules and a standard set and a framework for the game to operate in. Those people don't always have a point of reference, right? So it sometimes just depends. I want to say that regardless of whoever the player is, whether they're someone you know and trust or some random stranger who happen to just be willing to playtest your game, either way, I would say be careful of making major changes to your game in the early stages. In my opinion, this is likely when you are probably the most vulnerable. It's either at the very beginning, or it's when you've launched and it didn't do as good as you want. Then you're also very vulnerable at that point. But if the game falls flat on its face early in the development, early in the play testing, I think you should try to figure out why on your own. You can ask for some feedback, but do the steps I talked about in earlier episodes with your designing. You should have a decent basis to begin from. However, don't just give in and cut out huge mechanics because one person told you to. Think it over, and more than likely, you should walk away from the project for a few days. Get away from it. So you can make sure emotion isn't swaying you, but rather good points that your playtester brought up. When somebody goes and tells you, look, man, I see a bit of what you're doing, but you know what? I just really don't like the game. I don't think I'd buy it. I don't think, whatever. And they could say whatever they want. They're like, look, it's just not my thing. And that could be like soul crushing because you've put so much work in and then someone just blasts it. Even if it's like, especially if it's the first person who played and you can tell, maybe even if they're being nice, but you can tell they don't like it. They're not having fun. They're bored out of their mind. It's tough and you're really vulnerable in that point, and you might get swayed without even realize you're being swayed to make major changes. You got to be really careful that you are not making the game that your playtester wants. You're making the game that you want. Now, I would argue that you're trying to make a game, like I said before, you're trying to make a game that other people will enjoy. It's not a Rick Graham game, right? It's not all about me. I'm the game designer, but I want to be a business owner. I want to sell it. I want people to want to buy it. I want one day to have people that are so excited they're out there making fan fiction. I want them out there wanting to make their own custom units, knowing, it'll never be official, but they just want to be a part of it. I want that because that means there's people that are passionate about what I've done, but I have to make sure that it's also enjoyable for me. I don't want to, you're going to be going through teaching all these playtesters over and over and over and over all the regular rules, the new rules, the addended rule, all this stuff. You're going to be making so many changes, and you need it to be a game that you do enjoy. And if not, then it's going to drive you crazy. The best playtesters that I've found will give you their honest feedback, yet they realize that you may not be able to make any or maybe even all of the changes they suggested. Maybe that you can't use any of it. They recognize it is your game, and you are the one who has invested lots of time and possibly a sizable amount of money as well in developing it. Someone coming in after you have models designed to tell you that you should change your scale isn't helpful. Okay. It's not. I've had that happen. That's not fun. It's like, dude, I've already spent weeks or months developing these models, developing the scale, getting them printed for myself, the way that I did my business model, getting them painted, doing promotional pictures, talking about the scale, designing the game. And then here you come as a playtester and you're like, Rick, what would be great is if you went ahead and changed the scale, cut it in half, double it. In my opinion, there's nothing worse than someone who has no interest in buying your game tries to tell you you should change the scale of your game. All right. Like, people might get smacked for that because it's so frustrating because you've done so much time in development. And then here comes some, wise guy saying, what would be great is if you just change everything, cause I said so in a comment. I'm not going to buy it. Ugh. I know that's a bit of a rant, but it's a bit of a soft spot for me. Okay. It's still fresh wound as far as I'm concerned. All right. So the question of the episode, right? How do you tell if feedback is good or bad? Honestly, it's really hard, and you have to have a little bit of discernment, and you have to kind of pick through the comments. I would recommend also kind of picking up on their body language, judging also by how the play experience went. Doesn't matter if you necessarily think it's good. You kind of have to play off of like, do you think they had a good time? Do you? Because what will happen is your own emotions and opinions will be hard to see through. So you have to really try to focus on them. If you have a variety of different types of players, meaning, they have different backgrounds and experiences, ages, then see if you hear some of the same remarks. If you only play with, 30-year-old nerdy guys who love fantasy games, and that's all of you have for feedback, you may not be able to kind of discern or have enough variation in your feedback from the types of people you're playtesting with to kind of see if there's different, if there's a theme, kind of like the same sort of remarks, or if something comes up multiple times from different people. That's usually when I start to pay a little bit more attention to it. If I haven't already caught it and tried to, I've already been hemming and hawing on it. Should I make a change? I don't know. I don't know. You cannot always choose who your playtesters are. You may end up with basically the exact same age, gender, and financial demographic, right? You may end up with the same type. And if that's the type of people you're already targeting, that might even be a great thing. I don't necessarily have that experience myself yet. I've kind of had to just kind of go with who I can get. Thankfully, I've had some really great playtesters who've been very gracious through a lot of my changes. But, you sometimes have to work with what you got. So you may have to be a little bit more cautious with the filter that you put all their comments through to make sure that they are good, right? If you do that, it is possible that the feedback you receive is seriously worth looking into. Sometimes a remark you haven't heard before, maybe it's the first time someone brought it up, could be right on point. Like they are absolutely correct. If you were to make that tweak or make that change, your game would be flowing. But other times it's coming from someone really biased, or if their comment is coming from a really biased place, and you need to ignore those comments. I would say that if someone seems, this should go without saying, but just in case so that you hear it from somebody else, if you get comments, whether in person, which is less likely, but if you do, or from comments through the internet as you start to advertise, if the person seems like they're coming across as very rude, very condescending, I would automatically discount every single thing they say. If they don't have the decency to talk respectfully to me, because I really try to exhibit that to others. So if I don't receive it when I'm trying to do that, I'm already kind of looking to how to like disengage from the conversation. Not because I'm afraid to talk to them by any stretch. It's more that I don't want to waste my time. And I would say that they certainly can't be trusted to be giving good input because they're just an angry person. This can happen, like I said, from comments in person or online. Most of my negative stuff has been online. A lot of it has been from people getting the wrong idea about Revelations as a universe, or, that I'm trying to steal things from Battletech or that I'm trying to copy Battletech. It's like, okay, not everything, Battletech started by copying other people, legally or not. They started it. So don't say I'm copying when the thing that you love literally copied anime. Not that I'm even going out of my way to try to steal or copy or emulate all kinds of things from Battletech. Right? You're not. And I'm sure that you have some other universe or storyline or type of game that inspired you to want to make your own. Or maybe it was several different games. So it might end up having a little bit of similarity in certain points. That doesn't mean you're copying. That doesn't mean you're trying to steal anything. It just means that you're inspired by it. It was something that you grew up as a young person and you loved, or it was something that, even if introduced later in life and you just enjoy it so much and you just, there's parts of it you didn't really enjoy all the way and other things you really liked, and whatever. It's kind of getting into semantics, but I'm just saying, just be careful with the negative feedback, especially on the internet. I know that is really easy to say and all of us can talk tough. And then when you start getting multiple comments back to back of negative stuff, it'll end up breaking you. I used to do YouTube years ago. I don't remember if I've mentioned that yet in the podcast, and that was my job for a while. And I tried really hard to make really good content, and I ended up putting myself into a niche market, and I grew. I was the top person in that niche market, which was great. I never had experience being the popular guy ever, right? Like I never was that person. At least I never ever felt like it. And here I was on the internet, my first time really doing YouTube. I found myself in a niche market and I was the top guy. Everyone in that niche, pretty much everybody knew my name and followed me, and then they'd follow other people as well. But I was like the top guy. And that also attracted a lot of haters. I would get comments on my videos, because I did so many. I did hundreds of videos. I would get comments on my videos from people who didn't even want to watch it and would attack what I was doing for no earthly reason, just because they could. They weren't even fans. They weren't even in the same audience. It's like, why would you go in this video that you don't want to be in and then make a rude comment to the creator? There's tons of categories of types of videos I have zero interest in. Anything to do with bronies, for one. I know that's a couple years old thing. Don't get it, but okay. But I'm not going to go into a brony video and attack them or to belittle them. That's where their audience lives. That's fine. That's where they want to be. Go ahead, right? There's all these other niche markets, all these other niche audiences. I'm never going to be, a big Justin Bieber fan, but I'm not going to go into his music videos and trash him just because he's on the internet too. That's stupid, but people do that. And it's like, yeah, okay, Rick, I'm a big, strong adult. I can take bad comments, sticks and stones, but I'll tell you, it wears you down over time because you don't expect it to. I think a lot of us, if we're semi-successful adults in the sense that we can go buy food for ourselves, we make sure our bills are paid, we make sure we wear clean clothes, that type of life success of being able to operate independently, not counting the shakeups from COVID. For those of us who are relatively functional, we assume that someone's going to eventually be attack us for no reason and verbally assault us. But when it happens multiple times, it gets in your head because you're not used to that happening. At least I'm not. Maybe you live in an area where that is a common thing. I'm not. So it was new. And what was worse were the comments that came from people that I knew their names, or at least I knew their usernames. And I knew that they had followed me for years. And those guys, when they would start to leave comments like, "Oh, Rick, you really changed. Your video, you're a sellout," or you know, you're just doing this just for the money. Like, that stuff hurt more. Even if I didn't admit it to myself, looking back, I know that stuff hurt more because they knew me. They weren't some random guy who just happened to stumble across my video and just wanted to attack me because my content was nerdy. It was someone who had been with me, who was a fan, who was a follower, who was part of my community. So I know that down the road, as Revelations grows, right now we do not have a toxic community. I've only had one person I've had to ban, and it's because every single time I saw him comment, it was something negative. And I'm like, look, I don't need this in my life. I don't need a guy following me just hating on my stuff just because he can. So we got rid of him. We've only had one, though. I know that as we grow, there will be more, and I don't want to make a policy to just ban haters just because. It was more because, like, we already were not, at the time, not getting many comments on stuff we were doing. So you don't want one of the only comments you get, if not, maybe sometimes on social media, it's hard to get comments, the only comment. You don't want it to be negative. And then when it's the same guy, it's like, dude, go take a chill pill somewhere else, man. You don't need to be here following me. You obviously don't want to really like it because you're hating on it. So just, I don't know what else to say. I feel like I need to say something because I know that a storm of negative remarks, well-meaning or not, messes with you. And I don't want to see other creators get to a point where they say, you know what, it's not worth it. I've worked so hard. I've given so much. I've put in so much effort, so much time. I'll never get back. So much money I may never get back. And then they give up because a couple of people are trashing their product and all their work and all their effort. And it's hard. I'm not sure if at times it's worse to have no comments than bad comments. Because you start to get it's kind of like being in self-isolation, I imagine. Like, if I imagine what it would be like to be in a spacecraft, you know, you're just up in orbit all by yourself. And you're like, look, I haven't had human contact in weeks or months. It would just be nice if someone just said, you know what? I hate you. At least it'd be somebody, right? At least it'd be a comment. That's a side thing. It's kind of the dark place sometimes creators go to as they're trying to grow an audience. I don't say that to try to scare anybody off. I didn't mean to get into this sidetrack. My notes didn't go here, but it's just watch yourself. When you see a negative comment, make sure it doesn't affect you too much. Shake it off. Water on a duck's back. Just bloop, it just rolls off. If you keep hearing the same thing, maybe give it a little bit of attention. Like, okay, maybe there is something going on, but don't just, you know, someone comes in and says, you know, it's all garbage or something, that just throws you off. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to cancel the whole project. Don't do that. It's really hard. It's hard sometimes also with negative comments, because if the person is really biased and they really want you to make the game that they want, then they have an ulterior motive. Whether they realize it or not, they're trying to make your game the type of game they want, maybe even the type of game they already play. And for whatever earthly reason, they want you to emulate that other game, even though they've already got what they are looking for in that other game. So just be careful. All right. If you know what type of game you're after, or, you know, at least by now you should, you still need feedback to guide you so that the game isn't created only for your interest and you find yourself with no buyers. But you just got to temper the feedback also to filter it, basically. A key thing that I want you to hold on to out of this episode is that you should not take comments personally. It's really hard. but you need to give whoever the person is a chance to share their entire thought before you interrupt them. When I was doing YouTube, like I was saying, I allowed some of those comments, and this was over months of time. I started making less money, the way that the algorithm had changed. So I was doubting, I was working really hard, trying to figure out a new thing to do. I'd have to keep investing in more product to do the videos I was doing, because I was doing review videos. And I wasn't making as much as I was. So I had the pressure of that. And then, people hating on it, saying, oh, I don't like these types of videos. I don't like you trying to branch out and do new types of material. And it was just a really hard time. So then compounding all that self-doubt with what they were saying, you do take it personally. You do let it start getting in there if you're not careful, and kind of fight it off and resist it, because it'll just seep in, and it's very toxic. And I don't say that like the loose way that everyone throws around toxic now. I mean it in the literal term of it permeates and it just corrupts. So just, keep that in mind. At least that's what happened with me. Sometimes it does feel like they are just destroying all of your hard work, even accidentally, but you need to refrain from jumping in to defend your creative decisions, mainly from your play testers. This is really, really tough to do, though, when they're giving their feedback, and you need to bite your lip and just shut up until they're done talking. If you can help it, please tell your brain to tell your mouth to shut up. Just stay closed. Let them finish talking. It's very important. My play testers, by now, I'm pretty sure they all got it, but I don't want to say as an absolute guarantee. My play testers know I can't use every suggestion they give me. Even if it's a really good suggestion, sometimes it's like, yeah, but if we change that, we have to change a bunch of other mechanics. And then they don't realize that. And they're like, and when I explain that, they're like, oh, okay, well, no, that makes sense. All right, never mind. Don't just ignore my idea. I have tried really hard to make an environment and relationships with these guys where they can at least feel heard. I can't promise to use their ideas, but I can be sure to hear them out as best I can. You need to make yourself be quiet, not just in a respectful way of like just letting the person talk, because if they're going to go on and ramble for 15 minutes straight, you got to get a word in. But if one thing I had found is that sometimes people would say, well, why can, for example, we have order cards in Revelation Skirmish to simulate different types of orders that you as the player, you represent the commander. You're not on the field. You're in a command truck somewhere. You're in a spacecraft, like a big warship up in space that can see everything happening. So you're using a holodeck, which is the game area, the play table. So you can see everything going on with your forces and the enemy forces. So you're giving them orders, which are your order cards, giving them specific things to do, which is usually like some sort of boost for your forces. And then you start giving out orders, which is just the activations. So some of these order cards are tactical airstrikes. They're artillery strikes. Well, why are they tactical airstrike? Well, because aircraft in Revelation Skirmish, we play on a 3x3 space. So aircraft would be going so fast. One, they probably wouldn't even be on the board for a turn. And two, it doesn't make any sense to make models of them because they're going so fast. And aircraft would strike from high up and far away. They don't need to be, within a couple meters of an enemy war mech to shoot a bunch of missiles at it. So instead we use a tactical airstrike. So that way it simulates the aircraft are in the area. They've, launched whatever salvo to damage the target. And then they're taken off to go get rearmed or to move on to the next target. So they don't need to be on the table. Well, I've had people ask, but why are they so strong? And trying to make these changes, and they don't understand what I'm going for. With Revelation Skirmish, I'm going for a game that is grounded in reality. Obviously, it's a sci-fi universe that has only humans that do not originate from Earth. That's super wacky. Like, who the heck has done that? So it's something different. But I want the war aspect, the damage aspect to feel really gritty and more realistic because stuff blows up fast. Not like one hit and it's gone. Usually it takes a couple of hits, but if you hit the right spot a couple of times, the whole thing's gone really fast. So I want a fast-paced game. I want an aggressive game where it feels like if you make the wrong decision, that unit may be dead. And that doesn't mean it has a good tug-of-war system where you might lose a few units and then they're going to lose a few units. So you don't just end up getting steamrolled because you lost 2 guys and they have, their full army and they just wipe you out. But there will be casualties. Revelations the combat in that universe is not very forgiving. I've tried to design the novels to not have a lot of plot armor at all. I tried to put the heroes in situations where you feel like they could actually have made it out, not that they fought 50 mechs and with their one mech and they just took all 50 on at one time and all 50 were just shooting at them and they just were cartwheeling right through it and it was awesome. Like I try to make it feel like it's real or more real because it's still mechs, but whatever. Don't tell me mechs can't be real. But when people are playing the game, they don't necessarily have all that. I've got all that development, all those years of thoughts and ideas and work I've done. And then they sit down there like, why are your mechs so strong? Why are your cannons so strong? Why are the infantry able to take out this 2 or 3 story mech with laser rifles? And they don't know because they built laser rifles to shoot down mechs specifically. Yeah, it takes a lot of them, but they can do it. Why? Because I don't want infantry to be garbage. I need Revelation Skirmish is meant to be a combined arms game. It's not a mech game. It's a combined arms game. Yeah, the mechs are the eye candy, but it's a combined arms game. So I have to be more careful when I'm explaining the type of game to a player that I don't want them to get the wrong impression. So they don't know necessarily by playtesting once or demoing the game that infantry can be super deadly to a mech. I can tell them that, but until they experience that, they don't necessarily know. They see the big stomping robot and they're like, that's the guy. And then when that thing gets blasted to crap by a bunch of tanks, they might be a bit confused. Well, while they can be the heroes, quote unquote, they are not unstoppable by any stretch. They are not the gods on the field. A smart commander using just tanks and infantry should win. In points balance wise, they would probably need some like special stuff, but other than that, they should have a very good chance. But sometimes people sit down and they're playing and they don't know all those things. They haven't, and it's not even their fault. They're basically drinking from a fire hose to understand your game, understand the setting, understand the mechanics, play the game. They got all these questions because no matter what game you play, I don't care if you're playing Monopoly, I don't care if you're playing Yahtzee, whatever. Warhammer 40K, that's got a little bit more complexity than Yahtzee, but there's always questions when people play a game. Extremely rarely have I ever taught a person how to play a game and they never asked me a question because I explained it so well. And I'm pretty decent at training people. I actually kind of enjoyed that when I was a manager. So for those of you listening that are not good at training people or not good at explaining things, they're probably going to have some questions. So they may bring up some points that are kind of off base because maybe I've had people try to say, oh, well, it'd be great if you had this mechanic. And I'm like, but I do. Oh, yeah, it just didn't come up. So we didn't go over it. We were trying to play like more of a simplified game because I don't want to demo a game going full throttle. You need to know the advanced rules, buddy. Here's the book. And I just go. I want them to kind of ease into it, right? So it's sometimes people's ideas you already have done, or you went left when they wanted you to go right, or whatever. And it's just kind of all over the place. I don't remember where I was going with that. I feel like I'm circling kind of the same sort of thought, but I'm coming at it from different ways to hopefully prepare you for the types of comments you're going to be getting, because they're weird sometimes. The worst ones I find are still the ones. I don't get it a lot anymore because pretty much my regular playtesting group, they've got the rules down. We introduce a new unit. They're like, okay, we get it. And they can kind of move through really fast. When I teach someone who's never played before, it depends. Like if they're a miniatures war gamer, then they either get it and they like it, or they're a little more like they want it to be like more advanced. It's like, that's not the type of game we're going for. We're not going for like, checkers. We're going for an in-between between a complicated game and an oversimplified game. We want to find that medium setting so that people feel, and it's not medium in the sense of difficulty because there's a lot of tactical decisions you can make in Skirmish, but there's, I want it to be readily or decently grasped, even by people who've never played the type of game before, so that they can get it. They can see, they start to understand the stats pretty easily because it's pretty straightforward. They understand the mechanics and it just moves instead of being like, okay, here's this, 100-page rule book that you have to read to get everything. Or 100 plus even, because some games are just absolutely crazy. Going back to getting the type of feedback and being quiet, it's especially hard to do when someone is giving you all of these ideas of things they want you to add to your game. They could come up with all of these crazy advanced rules. I've gotten that a bunch of times where people are like, it'd be really great is if infantry could occupy a building. And for me, I've heard this multiple times and I'm like, yes, that would be really cool. But until we get standardized buildings, it's hard to make rules for terrain that isn't going to be the same for everybody or isn't accessible to everybody, because I'm worried about balance. I'm not worried about having one player's game experience. I'm worried about, okay, how are these players going to do this in Canada? How are they going to do this in Michigan? How are they going to do this in Germany? Because I don't know necessarily what everyone has. And I'm not trying to overly complicate the process, but at the same time, I want the players to be able to grasp what we're doing decently well. So advanced rules are usually where a lot of the feedback now boils into, because I think a lot of people can tell when I come in with my huge case of models that are just revelations, they probably know I'm not going to change the scale. They probably know I'm not going to change like the attack system. I'm not going to change how we measure movement. I'm not going to change the stat profile. So they kind of just move into other things they'd like to see into the game, even though sometimes when they're demoing, they're not even playing the full game. They're playing a little bit watered down, simplified version so that they can grasp and get to rolling dice. Or sometimes what happens, they want to spend all the time talking about a particular model or character idea that they have that they, when they want to go off on that side, model making, which is expensive and hella time consuming. When what you're there to do is get feedback, because of playtesting, on how your game works. So I would say if you're starting to go, if your player is going off and they're getting into like all these other weird advanced rules or things you could do, like, man, oh, you could go, oh my gosh, you could go and do this, you could do that. You should make a 4-legged tank mech or some crazy freaking thing. Try to figure out a way to guide the conversation to the points you need to cover, because you can only handle so much mental taxing. And that is a different type of lesson, but I think it's important for this one, for this episode. Trust me, playtesting is hard on your mind. You'll be teaching rules. You're coming up with new ideas while you're playing or listening to their feedback, even throughout the game. You're realizing there is a mechanic you meant to add but forgot to for whatever reason. Maybe from your last play session, you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to make the change to how, characters run or something like that. You're correcting yourself on changes you made to stats or the rules from previous versions. You're trying to be attentive to everything going on around you if you have multiple playtesting groups going, and a lot more. Don't get sucked into some long debate that someone wants to have that is pointless or just going to spend your brain power. When you're doing playtesting, you need to try to focus yourself, because I'm telling you, look, you do 2 hours of playtesting. You're doing all those things I said. You're teaching rules, you're making corrections, you're explaining how the game is played, and you're watching the player, you're learning from the player, you're trying to observe and take in information from them. How are they receiving, are they having a good time? Do they seem like they're having a good time? Even if they're losing, are they trying to have, or do they seem like they're having fun and enjoying themselves? And you're analyzing so much, it wears you out. So be careful of those conversations that are literally pointless, and try to steer them back to something that's productive. kind of what I mentioned, I think in the last episode, you need to take notes. This is another thing that helps with your brain taxing that's going to be going on. You need to try to write stuff down because you won't remember it all. If you sat down with me and I'm play testing your game in an hour, I'm probably going to have a lot of feedback. And I'm not just saying that because I can make this podcast. I'm saying it just as a player who realizes I want to try to help you. But that's why I'm play testing your game. So I want to try to do something to help you out, and I want to give you feedback. And I can promise that you will not remember most of our conversation. Why? Because that's just not how humans are. Unless you have like a I don't know what the right word is. It's like a photographic memory, but for sounds. I know some people have that. That's fantastic. I don't have that. I forget things. So I have to write stuff down. I'm doing everything I can to remember, like my wife's birthday and whatever else is coming up next week. Do I have a freelance job? You know, and all these other things I'm trying to do and learn and do it. And so it's a lot. So try to write it down. I have a particular notebook. It's beside me at the moment because I was making some notes for possibly a new game mode for Revelations. But I try to take that same notebook with me, if I can remember, to when I do my playtesting. So that way my notes stay in one place. I don't have them scattered about in different notebooks or on my phone or wherever else. I'm typically a pen and paper guy for at least most of my process. When I start getting into more of the detailed stuff, I write my notes or I write my rules and everything in on the computer. But when I'm doing, I try to like to have a lot of things in paper because I can keep it with me. I can have things up on my monitors and I can still have my notebook. I can still have those physical notes until it gets more detailed and big and I need to put it on the computer. But I would recommend that. Keep that notebook with you because then everything's kind of together. Build some sort of system where you know, okay, playtest session 1, this is kind of what we had. I know some of you listening are probably going to be a little bit more detail oriented than I am, and your notes are going to be lengthy or they're going to be kind of crazy. You have to figure out whatever system works for you. If it's just notes, if it's like, you know, full long sentences and paragraphs. Understand though that when you're with that player, you need to respect their time and try not to keep them around because you're like, okay, yeah. And you're writing for like 5 minutes straight and then ask them another question. You want to try to make it enjoyable from the beginning of when you meet up with them to the end when they walk away, because, you know, they're doing you a favor, right? Like a playtester is giving of their own time they never get back in their life. And they're giving that to you, and you need to try to respect that and try to use that wisely and take advantage of it because you won't always have them. And yeah, you could ask them questions later, but it won't be in the moment, and then they'll lose some of the enthusiasm or and sometimes people walk away and they think about stuff and they can give a better answer or a more thoughtful answer. Sometimes it's not bad to ask people later just because of the fact that they have time to process more. But you want to try to get some of that raw thoughts because sometimes that's where a lot of it is, a lot of the real is. Other times people are just too nice and they don't really want to give you like the full feedback because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And that's kind of hard to kind of tell. So that's when I was mentioning in the last episode, you want to ask really good probing questions to try to, don't just do a lot of yes or no questions. Sometimes I ask like, you know, or a good example would be, you know, what's your favorite mechanic from this game? What's the type of mechanic that you like the least? Right? Like you're still asking a question, you know, and you can tell them, you can start it with, look, man, I need honest feedback. Constructive criticism is the only way I'm going to be able to move forward. And you kind of specify constructive criticism so they're not a jerk about it. It's just kind of subtle little things you're just seeding the ground with. But you want to ask the probing questions to get better feedback. Yes or no is great at certain times. If you're asking like, did you enjoy the way that the attack system worked? Yes. And then you can maybe follow that up with a more probing question of like, what part did you like the best about it? Or how easy did you find these rules to learn? What sort of mechanics would you like to see? But that sort of leads into a lot of advanced rules questions, especially if it's coming from an experienced wargamer. And different stuff like that. And just trying to respect their time and get the types of questions you need to ask hopefully getting the feedback. And at the same time, just like I was mentioning for you, you're going to be mentally taxed. They are too. They just went through maybe an hour, 2 or 3 hour game session with you, learning new rules, hashing things out with you, debating and trying to give some good feedback and some good ideas. They can only do so much of that too before they're spent. So we only get so much time with them. So ask the critical questions you need. Try not to spend time getting sidetracked with feedback on things that don't matter, like paint schemes or I don't know. There's literally 1,000 million conversations you could have. So many that come to my mind immediately, but some of them are not important for your play testing, especially when you're in the beta. And it's really easy because you're the creator and you finally get someone who's interested in your game. They show a little bit of interest and you're just like, I'm so excited. Somebody cares. At least you think in the moment, because you've been doing all this yourself. So it's great to just get with somebody else who wants to be interested, but be careful. You don't just open up the dam and just flood them with information. You don't need to tell them a bunch of things of like, okay, these are all the future things we're going to do. Tell them maybe a little bit if it's relevant to the conversation, but don't overdo it. It's so easy to. You can get into like, oh man, we're going to have these mechanics. You're going to be able to do all this stuff later in the game. And there's going to be all these different factions and all this different stuff. What I do is I just tell people like, these are the factions we have. I might tell them a little bit about them just because I'm trying to get them interested so they want to buy. But then I don't even really get into the other factions. If they ask, hey, are you ever thinking about having a type of faction that does X? I might bring up, yeah, down the road, we would love to get to that. I don't know of a better satisfactory answer because I know that what they would prefer is, yes, I have it right now. I just didn't get it out for you to play with. It's for sale right now, or it will be when we launch. But that's not always the case because factions are very expensive because it usually involves a lot more models for you to be able to roll out. And that's maybe thousands more dollars. So, and there will be people who will tell you, man, I like this game. I like your idea. I like your universe. I like the brand. I like the concept. But when that other faction comes out, whatever one that they want, then I'll get into the game. Sometimes those people are probably being absolutely truthful. Other times they might be looking for a way to be like kindly ducking underneath you asking, hey man, you want to back my Kickstarter? So just, if they're being nice, just be nice and don't try to make it weird because maybe they'll end up being won over and they will get interested. Maybe they'll be willing to at least play test more with you so you get more feedback so your game can get better. What happens if they hate your game? What if they play it and they're like, man, I know you've done so much work, but I don't think this is the game for me, right? Or we're taking out all the jerks that would just be like laying into it, just blasting it. The kind people who are kindly telling you, it's just not for me. I wouldn't worry about it. Thank you. Thank you for telling me so I don't keep bugging you to play test with me because you're my friend or because we're in the same gaming group or whatever. I don't think it's a bad thing. For people to just tell you straight up, look, this game's not for me. Then I don't have to waste my time with them, and I can respect that they could at least tell me kindly that it just wasn't going to work. I don't take it personal. I don't worry about like, man, that means my game must suck because this person didn't like it. Who cares? Right? You're going to have people who don't like it. So what does it matter if you ran into somebody who was playtesting and didn't like it? Whatever, move on. What if they only have negative feedback? So what if they say like, enough where they're like, I like the concept or I like the universe. I like what I see, but then all they do is give you bad feedback, negative feedback, hurtful feedback, maybe even. I would just be careful, like I mentioned before, of how well I receive it. As adults, we learn, hopefully, how to be able to take people will say hurtful things or mean things or things on accident that happen to be hurtful, and we have to kind of just endure it and just develop a thicker skin. That was one of the better things that came out of my not so fun experience through YouTube. I had a really great beginning, a really great middle, and an awful end. Terrible, crushed me. It took me a while to get over it because I lost my business. I lost my community, basically. I lost my hobby because I was using it as a means of income and as a hobby for me. It was my source of probably a validation. I went from getting all this great feedback and all this adoration from people I didn't even know. I never even saw their face, but I probably developed some sort of dependency on it. It helped me to when you get to a place where a bunch of people like you, and then all of a sudden you lose that without a good grounding, it messes you up. It does. It sucks. It's a tough lesson to learn. I'm glad I did. I wish I didn't stick with it as long as I did and let it bother me, but it was good. And I can pass that on now to you guys. So don't do that. All right. What happens if they question why you made a rule a certain way? If you feel it's worth it, explain it. I would try to explain it in the shortest amount of time possible, because you don't want to pause a playtesting session because somebody says, well, that's interesting. Why did you do, for me, like, why did you do a D10 system? And I can just quickly say, because it has more numbers. Or I can say, well, because I liked it, because it just allowed for more variation. And I was tired of only playing D6 games, or, something like that. And most people will just take your answer and move on. But some other people want to dig their heels in for whatever reason and just nitpick of like, well, I wouldn't have done that. I would have done. Well, no, I don't care what you would have done. I'm here to play test the game and get feedback, but I don't necessarily need you to pull every single decision I made apart on a technical whatever basis and undo, hundreds of hours of work because you didn't think it was a good idea. So you gotta be careful with that, getting sucked into those weird debates or getting into this weird reasoning. I don't have an issue if someone were to ask me right now, listening to this podcast, of anything in Revelations. I have no issue explaining it. But at the same time, it comes to a point that if they can't just accept it and move on, and they just want to just dig in and just argue with me, I don't have time for that. I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm sure, even if you're doing nothing, you'd rather be doing something else than arguing with some guy over the internet because he wants to know why your mechs have hands. Sometimes people get into some of that weird stuff, and you're like, this isn't important. Let's move on. So you have the same thing sometimes in playtesting where... like in the last episode, I told you about the guy I knew probably wasn't going to like the game, and then he didn't like the game. So he was giving me all these ideas that were going to just change everything about Revelation Skirmish. It was going to change the pacing. It was going to change the time of the game. It was going to change the scale. It was going to change basically all the mechanics. It was a different game is what he was suggesting to me. So it didn't matter. I tried to be as nice and respectful as I could in that conversation. I was appreciative that he gave the game a chance, but I also wasn't going to go on for 2 hours talking to him about why I made decisions or why I didn't do the game that he wanted. Like it gets to a point where you're like, you can just tell, look, this is going to be a waste of both of our time. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I try to figure out a way around it and get it back to something that either is positive that I can glean from them or disengage because I know it's not going to work. It's tough to do, especially when you're first going. You'll figure it out as you go. It's still what I would say with playtesters. Don't try to have too many. Don't try to have a whole bunch of people when you're first starting because you need to get the mechanics to a good spot. When you start going and you say, look, I want to start doing some insane number of people to play test. I want to have 100 people play my game. I wouldn't do that until you're at like the 90 plus percent completion place. So now you're doing this fine tweaking with more of mass data of, maybe doing blind testing or other things like that. But you've gotten the vast majority of your game locked in tight. You don't want to be having 30 people play your game and it's literally was created a week ago. There's just not enough time for you to do it. One last point before we wrap up. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm kind of feeling now I should hit it a little bit harder. Give yourself time before you make major changes. No matter how good the playtesting session went, how bad it went, and this is more especially true when it's bad. The person didn't like it. They meant well, but they gave some really ripping comments, or you just felt like it didn't go that good, even though they had fun. You still felt like it wasn't good. It wasn't finished. It could have been better. Give yourself some time. Put a couple of days in between making big changes. You can write down your notes and say, I want to try changing this mechanic this way or changing these stats this way. But don't make it official for a couple of days. A lot of us, probably anybody listening to this doesn't do this full time. We don't have this huge deadline approaching where we have to have it out because the product has to be out because we've got a client that, whatever. We don't have those street dates and everything going on. So we can have a little bit of time, a little bit of pause in between and give ourselves time to test. I've been doing this now for a year and a half. I'm trying to remember the timeline. 2020 was kind of a blur. I'd already been doing it for before 2020. So that's why I'm saying it is a year and a half, I think, of development. It might even be pretty close to 2 years right now. Probably not. Probably closer to like a year and a half plus. So for me to make changes, I have more experience. I've spent so much more time inside of my engine. So I know that if I tweak a tank's stats, because some people were saying, look, Rick, you made a new weapon. I think it's broke. It's too good. It's too cheap, something. There's too many positives, not enough negatives to kind of counter it so it feels more balanced. I can make those tweaks pretty much on the spot. Because sometimes it's only like one number, or maybe I figured out a new keyword that we could test that would just change everything really easily and make it really balanced. But I have way more experience in this. When you're first starting, you need to be a little bit more careful because, you go and you change how your critical hit system works if you have that, or how your save system works, or how your special ability system works. Like maybe you have different rounds for it, or any types of other crazy different unique mechanics you come up with. If you change those too quickly, it changes your game. It changes it a lot. So when you're going to make those big core engine changes, give that some thought. Play test it the new way if you want. Absolutely. But don't forget and abandon the last way because maybe you got one bad comment on it. Maybe the player had a bad experience. The dice just destroyed him. That sucks. There's nothing you can do about that. I've had players I've been play testing with where my dice are literally just rolling fails. Fail. It works out good for the playtester because they're having a good time because they're just wiping the floor with me. But, and I've had it on the other side where I've played different games where my opponent is just failing constantly. And I feel bad because there's nothing that they can do because I've been in that situation where the dice just fail you and there's literally no tactical decision you can make because they're staying alive and your guys are dying. And it doesn't matter what you do, what you try. So if somebody has a game like that, probably play a second game if they have time so that they can test it again. Usually people don't take it personally, especially when they're demoing or playtesting because they know it's not a serious game. If it's a league or a tournament where there's money on the line, people are going to be a little bit more salty. Most people in a playtesting session understand the game isn't complete. They understand, you're not finished, or they understand you're a small creator trying to start a new business, trying to start a new brand, and they understand decently well. Maybe they don't fully grasp all the work you had to put into it, but they at least understand you're not FFG. You're not, Privateer Press. You're not these big companies. When you see their playtester session, you're like, I don't know, that's so many people. But be careful, like I'm saying, of how much time you allow in between major changes. You can go overkill. You can give yourself too much time or not enough time, but try to find like a decent spot. I think a couple of days in between will give you a little bit fresher perspective. The newness of their comments have kind of dulled a little bit. You don't want to take too long. Like if you go weeks and weeks, you'll forget everything that they basically said. You'll remember like one or two main points, but you'll forget the feeling of it. And sometimes that's really important. But you don't want to just like say, you know what, you're right. Let's just rip out the attack system. Let's just try this other one. That's just a major change. And I would kind of shy away from that because hopefully you spent some time playtesting by yourself, but also you've spent some time figuring out what mechanics do you want to be inspired from by other games, or what type of mechanic have you never seen anybody do before and you really want it to be the way you think it will be the best, right? You think it'll really work well within your system. So you introduce some new mechanic that you haven't seen anywhere before. And yeah, when a game is played by somebody who's never played the type of game you've done, whether they're an experienced wargamer or a brand new rookie or whatever, if they haven't played the type of game you made, or maybe you've introduced like some weird combination from different genres together, sometimes people might have a little bit harder time because they're used to a certain expectation. So then your new thing is so different that their comments are going to be, like I mentioned before, they're going to be more biased because of their experiences. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. Feedback is very important. You need feedback. People need to feel heard. That's an important thing for humans as a whole, but also as a community leader, because as you're building your brand, until you have a community person who kind of just helps moderate things or help maybe kind of get your social media posts or whatever you're using to advertise and just share and grow your brand. If you're the person, you're the person doing it. So you need feedback when you post pictures of a new model, or you do a battle report, or you do a promotional image, or you just ask for feedback from the community for a particular thing. Hey guys, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you guys think? Stuff like that. Like you need to be able to listen to the feedback. You cannot hide from feedback, but you can't let feedback be everything. If that makes sense. There's a place to find in there. And it'll take you some experience of making bad decisions a little bit, but also of kind of just learning how to grade and properly weigh what other people are saying. All right. So thank you guys again for listening. This podcast has actually done decently well, considering I'm doing, as of when I'm recording this, in February of 2021. I'm doing right now relatively no advertising whatsoever. So I've been pretty happy as the show continues to actually grow in listens, and at least in the analytics I have of the number of people listening has grown a bit. So I knew from the beginning this podcast would never be millions of listeners. There's not that many people out there probably trying to figure out how to make a miniatures game. There's probably a decent number of people who would like to dabble in it, but not maybe as many who have the ability like I do right now to kind of do it part-time because they don't need the money to live. Even though I want this to be my sole income provider. I've got some other ideas for some stuff. I don't really want to say too much yet because I don't really know how everyone's going to, like, I had some ideas for how to expand what we're doing here with this podcast. I've thought about doing a different podcast in addition to this, where teaching people how to write sci-fi. So it focuses more on the lore side. So people listening to this who, like I mentioned, like in episode 1, I think it was about lore, I think. It would kind of tie into that, but it would just go into creating your factions, creating the nations, creating the tech of your universe, creating just different characters, the different vehicles, and how everything works together, and how to build a plot, and how to build, how to actually write out a short story, or how to write out a novel, how to outline it, and how to edit. Oh my gosh, that's a whole thing. How to market it, how to get art for it, and all these other things. I've kind of thought about doing that. I don't know if there's interest yet. I don't know if I have to kind of look and see if there's a bunch of other podcasters already doing it. There's definitely a bigger market there, bigger audience anyway of listeners, potentially, but there's already other people out there. And while I've gotten good comments and remarks and reviews on my stuff, I'm not award winning. So I'm not really like, the guy. There's nobody out here teaching you how to make your own miniatures games. So I'm like, well, why the heck not? Like, well, I can do that. I've done it, right? I don't have billions in sales, but I've done it. I've developed it. So I can help people who have no audience. I can help people who have no game whatsoever, have no idea what they're doing. I can help those people to kind of move up to my level for sure, because I've done it. I'm there. Yeah. So I could kind of do the same thing with the novels. I can't tell you how to sell 10,000 billion majillion copies, but I can tell you how to write it. I can tell you how to get it made, right? And I've had a couple other ideas too that are kind of in the same vein of how to make your own miniatures game. I don't know if the audience is big enough yet to kind of roll out some of those ideas. It's kind of more of like mentoring or consulting kind of things to help people specifically. Because like when I make these episodes, I'm just kind of painting with a very broad brush versus a one-on-one kind of conversation where it's like, hey, Rick, this is what I'm kind of, this is where we are. This is the problem I'm having. How do I fix it? Where it's very specific to that creator rather than, guys, this is my general advice for this topic kind of thing. Anyway, I don't know. We'll kind of see if there's interest. I don't know. Anyway, again, thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you guys again next time. See ya.